Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to head down to Austria once again and we're going to have a look at yet another of the Hans beers. So first and foremost, a massive shout out and thank you to Hans Feigl, my Austrian beer mule living in Vienna. It's thanks to him that from now on you are going to enjoy a steady stream of Austrian reviews here on Rampant Lion Reviews. Now, as I've explained in the previous Austrian videos, there are some very good Austrian craft beers and breweries out there these days, but they're just very difficult to get a hold of unless you're in the country itself. So it's always great to have people like Hans who are facilitating these beer reviews on the channel. So Hans, a massive thank you to you for making this review and the other Austrian ones that we've had over the last little while possible. You guys watching might have seen that Hans sent me a box of Viennese microbrewed Vienna lagers amongst a few other things, and it's been really nice to work my way through these over the last little while. So I hope that you guys have been enjoying this Austrian mini-series, and I've certainly enjoyed getting a little bit more familiar with the Vienna lager style actually, and having a few other little treats along the way too. But yeah, very cool to try these, and we'll need to do another Austrian box at some point soon because we are getting towards the end of the Hans beers at the moment actually. But yeah, looking forward to this one. So for this review we are going to go back to Vienna and we're going to have a look at a beer from another brewery that I've never tried anything from before. So yeah, we're going to the Atzgersdorf district in the city this time, and we're going to have a look at my first beer from Blumen Brauerei, or the 100 Flowers Brewery, I guess you might say in English. But this one is their Vienna lager. It comes in at 5.2% ABV, and yeah, I think you know exactly what style this one is already. But yeah, very curious to see what this one has in store for us. We've had some really nice examples of this style from Hans over the last little while, and yeah, hopefully this one carries on in the same vein. But always nice to introduce new breweries from new places here on the channel, and like I said earlier, I hope that you guys enjoy this Austrian mini-series that we've been doing. So yeah, as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I'll hopefully be able to do in the future from Blumen Brauerei. This is the very first time I'm trying one of their beers, as I've mentioned, but there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlists of beers from different countries. There is one there for the Austrian beers that I've been reviewing for you, and that's being added to gradually at the moment as we work our way through the Hans beers, and I'm sure we'll get more from Hans at some point in the future to add to that as well. I've been enjoying these Austrian beers, as I've mentioned, but as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, on to my brewery notes then to tell you a little bit about the Blumen Brauerei, and I will apologise in advance for any bad German pronunciations in this video, because no doubt I will mess something up. But yeah, so Blumen Brauerei are, as I mentioned, based in the Atzgersdorf district in Vienna, which is kind of in the sort of southwestern part of the city, I should say, and they're very obsessed in Vienna about exactly what district and things they come from. And I've had that experience with the other reviews when I've been reading all these articles and things like that. But this company was founded back in 2016 by Alex Forstinger. So Alex was a sinology student, or Chinese studies in other words, and his mother's family actually have roots in China as well. I believe his mother's from Beijing. But the 100 Blumen, or 100 Flowers as it would be in English, this is a name that's a reference to Chinese culture, and it means the best of times are just beginning, and it's also a reference to a movement from the 1950s, from what I understand, of course. Just after that, that is when you had the Mao Zedong takeover, and a lot of the Chinese culture was destroyed on the back of that, of course, other than in Taiwan. But yeah, things changing, of course, over there these days, from what I understand. Some things for the good, some things for the not so good. But yeah, we'll stick to the beer, of course. We'll stick to the beer. But anyway, Alex had always been interested in beer, and when he finished these studies, he decided that he wanted to start his own brewery properly. But he'd been brewing beer in his student apartment in the Burgenland area of the city, and he'd been using books to do this and gather information, as well as watching YouTube videos and stuff like this. But in 2017 they began converting a former piano factory on Endlerstraße in the Atzgersdorf area of Leising, which is in southwestern Vienna. They began converting this, and apparently there was around €1 million invested in this facility in total, and they got some of this from banks and also from local kind of business development funds. But over the course of 2018, when they got the brewery up and running, they brewed around 100,000 litres of beer. And over the last few years, they've continued to develop new recipes and expand the brewery. And these days, they open up the brewery for a bar from Thursday to Saturday, from what I understand. They've got quite a few different beers, and as of August 2021, when I'm filming this one for you, these guys have produced around 25 different kinds of beer, according to Untappd. And there's a fair few different styles in there, actually. If you look through the list on Untappd, you'll find quite a few kind of traditional Austrian, German, Czech type styles, as well as one or two kind of more American and English influence things, of course. So yeah, an interesting little brewery. If you look at the pictures of their brewery as well, it is quite interesting. So yeah, that's somewhere that it's somewhere that I would like to go and visit. I need to go back to Vienna. I was there when I was quite young, from what I remember, and I don't remember it at all, but it seems to be that a lot of the little breweries there have their own kind of tap rooms and things, so I'm sure you could kind of jump around the different breweries there and have some fun doing some out and about videos. So maybe that's something that we need to do at some point in the future. But yeah, that is all I can really tell you about the Blumen Brauerei for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on. And you can, of course, check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate page to learn a little bit more about all the different beer that these guys have done. So yeah, that is it for your history section. Let's get on and have a look at the beer itself. So as you can see, the artwork on this one is pretty nice. I think it did say who the artist was on the bottle, I thought. Apparently not, but yeah, there you can see, as we say, 100 flowers, 100 Blumen. There's a movement, as we said, back in the 1950s, meaning the best of times are ahead. I do like that, you know, the kind of positive outlook going forward. I do like that kind of vibe, and that is also on the bottle cap of this one, we should say as well. But as we said at the start of the video, this one is a 5.2% Vienna lager. I always loved this word in German, Stammwürze. I always enjoyed this. But yeah, 330ml bottle. This one, I think this costs Hans somewhere in the region of, like, you know, €2 when he bought it. He did give me a price list of these beers, but I forgot. But the Austrian beers are not too expensive, actually, compared to the ones we have up here in Scandinavia. But yeah, 330ml bottle, this one. Vienna lager, of course, as I've explained to you in the other Vienna lager videos, for me, Vienna lagers tend to be, you know, quite bready. They also tend to have a little bit of a kind of brown sugary sweetness to them, a mix of biscuit and caramel, of course. But the basic definition of a lager is a cold temperature fermentation, bottom fermenting yeast. The fermentation takes place between 8 to 12 degrees, whereas with ales, it's top fermenting yeast, and that takes place between about 15 to 18 degrees Celsius. There's many different types of lagers, of course, and most of them you've got you have the German types and you've got the Czech types. For me, generally speaking, the German ones tend to be a bit lighter and crisper, whereas the Czech ones tend to be a little bit more kind of bready and yeasty. So for example, in Germany you have the Helles beer, and within that you've got the Dortmunder Helles, which is a bit more hoppy, the Munich Helles, which is a bit more bready. Then the Czechs have the Svetli. Both of these are blonde lagers, of course. In Germany you'll get the Märzen, for example, more of a kind of amber lager, a bit more kind of biscuity, whereas in the Czech Republic you have the Letzak, of course. Then the Germans have got the Dunkel, the mahogany lager. The Czechs have got the Czerny. The Germans have got the Schwarzbier, the black lager, and the Czechs have got the Tmawy. And then you've got things like the different Bock beers and stuff, which are also lagers. And you do have the Vienna lager as well. So the comparable styles to this one would, of course, be the Märzen, which I find is a little bit lighter, you know, a bit crisper and a bit more biscuity, whereas the other one would be the Czech Letzak, which is a little bit more kind of straight up and bready. This one, the Vienna lagers, in my experience, tend to be a little bit sweeter. than the Czech late Sachs. But yeah, lots of very good lager beers out there, and it's nice to see that lagers are getting a little bit more attention these days. Lots of breweries are now having a go at brewing lagers rather than just brewing IPAs and stuff like this. But yeah, enough about lagers. 5.2% Vienna lager, this one from Blumen Brauerei in the Atzgersdorf area in Vienna, southwestern Vienna. So yeah, let's get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting then. Very curious to see what this one has in store for us. Nice bit of smoke on the opening there, and we'll get this guy out and into the glass. So there we are. Just going to be a bit careful with this one because it looked in the bottle as if there had been some sediment in there, and I'm getting carbonation sticking to the side of the glass as well, even though I washed it. Even though I washed the glass, still getting a little bit of this. But yeah, this does look pretty nice, I have to say. Is there sediment on the bottom? Just a little bit, just a little bit. Quite unusual to get sediment with lagers, of course, but you know, when they are microbrewed like this, it sort of makes sense actually. But yeah, this certainly looks very, very nice. Now let me just check this beer through the light. So before the head disappears, we can say that this beer has poured with about a half finger of a frothy, I would say kind of sort of fawn coloured head. It's fading away to just be a very, very thin foamy layer, of course, but yeah, that ring around the edge of the glass is going to linger there quite nicely. But you know, on first impressions, this is actually one of the more mahogany leaning Vienna lagers that I've seen, I think, out of the ones we've had. I'm trying to remember, the other ones have all been a little bit kind of brighter than this. This one is the first one that strikes me as being more kind of mahogany, and of course you would, from a Vienna lager, you would expect a sort of, you know, coppery, you know, a kind of reddish coppery mahogany type colour, but this one just strikes me as being a little bit more woody in its colour. So remember, the colour of your beer is dependent on 1, the type of malts that you use. This usually determines the magnitude of the colour, of course. 2, the length of your wort boil. The longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. And then any, you know, adjuncts that you put in and barrel aging that you do are also going to affect the colour as well. But those two factors tend to play more of a role when it comes to you know, these fruity, juicy sours, the Berliner Weisses and the Goses and things like that. The latter two tend to play more of a role when it comes to you know, the sour beers and stuff. But yeah, it certainly looks the part of a Vienna lager. But as I say, this one, to me, it's the mahogany colour that strikes me a little bit more about this one. But yeah, 1 or 2 big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass, a few little ones going up towards the bottom of the surface there. But it looks very nice, as I say, and you can see it does have quite a little bit of a natural haze to it. There are 1 or 2 little bits of particulate matter just floating around in this one. But yeah, let's look at the aroma then and see how we get on. There's nothing overly surprising about the appearance of this beer, so let's go for it then. Oh, yeah, this one smells quite nice. I'm going to say straight away, the aroma from this beer, it's got a big, this one has a big kind of brown, grainy, bready sort of component to it, which I can certainly appreciate. Yeah, and I have to say, this is one of the things that I've been noticing about the Vienna lager styles. Quite a few of the ones that I've had have been considerably more sort of bready and grainy than I would have expected, because a lot of I've had a couple of examples of Vienna lagers brewed by breweries here in Sweden, and I think back home in Scotland I'd had maybe 1 or 2, but not all that many, maybe 1 from Brewdog, and I think one of the other breweries had done one as well. But yeah, you know, my impression of the Vienna lager before trying these Viennese ones was that, you know, they were always very, very smooth and very, very sweet. But you notice when you try ones from different breweries, they can be a little bit more grainy. Some of them can be a bit more biscuity. Some of them can even have, you know, quite woody elements to them as well. So this one to me strikes me as being a little bit more kind of bready and grainy in a sense. So that's the first impression out of this one. But these guys actually do have a bread beer that they do, which it would be quite interesting to try. So yeah, they've got a proper collaboration beer that they did with a bakery, which sounds very interesting. So yeah, that was one of the articles that I found when I was researching this brewery, of course. But anyway, let's focus on the aroma of this beer then. So at the backbone of this one, as I say, you get a lovely kind of big brown bready, bread crusty note to this one. To me, the backbone of this beer smells almost like rye bready. So yeah, you can feel the slightly more kind of dry bread crusty note in the backbone of the beer, but on top of that you get a little bit more of a kind of smoother bread, if you like, but a lot of kind of brown wholemealy rye bread coming out of this beer, that's for sure. Certainly an element of brown sugar in there as well, but you get one or two, you know, you get a bit of woody element out of this one. Nice kind of little bit of a woody character to this beer for sure. Yeah, a few kind of woody, maybe even a very slightly nutty element to this one, but I'd be more inclined to say woody rather than anything else. But yeah, woody element, nutty element. You've got that big kind of brown bready note in there. It's actually quite nice in that sense because it smells like a very kind of freshly baked bread crust, that you can almost smell like a wee bit of the flour from the bread crust, if you like, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, on top of that, you've certainly got a bit of brown sugar, and for me, the brown sugars actually come across as quite toasty. You do get an element of sweet caramel out of it, but I would say that overall, the brown sugars are really more kind of toasty, and as I say, a little element of sweetness to them. You almost get a bit of that kind of more. It's almost like there's a slight element of a kind of treacly molasses kind of thing in there, but very, very slight. I hesitate with that remark, but to me it does smell as if there's a wee bit of that kind of more highly caramelised brown sugar in this one. And then you've got a lot of a kind of toasty, you know, there is a good kind of toasty brown sugary element in this beer as well. So it's interesting how that all goes together in this beer. But yeah, the malty side of things is kind of pretty much what you'd expect. But when we talk about the spectrum of Vienna lagers, I would definitely say that this one leans more towards the kind of bready, grainy side and the sort of toasty brown sugar part of the spectrum as well. But on the hoppy side of things, let's have a little look at that then. So hoppy wise, you know, I actually get quite a bit of earthiness out of this one. I can smell a good little bit of earthy hop character in this. You get a little bit of a herbal quality to it as well, some nice floral aromaticity, but I do find there is a good earthy sort of herbal presence to this beer, and that sort of builds a good bridge with the more kind of grainy bready thing that we have. And you've also got a little bit of a lighter grassy element to this beer as well, which I think is quite nice. The grassiness does have a good bit of brightness to it. I do wonder if they're maybe using Austrian hops in this. The Austrian hop region, of course, is the Mühlviertal, if I'm remembering how to pronounce that correctly. But yeah, nice green component to this one, but a good herbal, slightly more earthy kind of note to it. But bright grassiness too. On the fruity side of things then, I mean, this beer is kind of what you would expect in that sense as well. You get a slight hint of a red fruit, you know, a very light kind of figgy element almost, if we can say that. But on top of that, quite a lot of, quite a bit of sultana for me. You know, dried white grapes, green grapes, that kind of thing. So a little bit of sultana, a bit of a kind of peary element to it as well. So yeah, I think that's a good way to describe the fruitiness out of this one. It's got quite a bit of dry, as I say, it's the dried fruit you get out of this, the sultanas. Maybe, yeah, sultanas, a little bit of a juicy fig almost underneath. You always get a slight hint of red fruit out of these beers, but quite a lot of pear for me as well, an oily kind of peary quality. But yeah, interesting aroma to this one. As I always say, take a bit of time to ponder over the aroma of the beer before you get stuck into it, but I think it is about time that we have a taste of this one now. So yeah, this one is the Wiener Lager, coming in at 5.2% ABV from Blumen Brauerei in Vienna. Let's get stuck into this one. The Atzgersdorf district in Vienna. We should say that because they do like their districts there. But yeah, let's get stuck into this one. Slange, skål, cheers, and prost. Thank you again to Hans for making this review possible. Cheers. Yeah, that's pretty nice actually. First impression of this one, as we say, it's quite, the first impression, the first sip of this beer strikes me as being a little bit more kind of oily than some of the other ones we've had. But it has got a nice slickness to it. It certainly has a nice slickness to it, this beer, at the same time. But yeah, it is quite, it's got a good balance between the kind of big bready notes and the brown sugars, I would certainly say that about it. So yeah, I think I'm going to enjoy this one. Yeah, a lot. This is one of these beers where the aroma really translates into the flavour quite well. It's one of these ones where the aroma gives you a very good impression of what the flavour is going to be like, actually. So yeah, this one I think is quite interesting, that's for sure. So yeah, let's try and break this down for you a little bit then and describe it a wee bit more succinctly, could we say. So straight away across the middle third of your palate, you can feel that nice sort of brown bready backbone there. That goes right across the middle of your palate, which I think is great. So yeah, you can feel that nice big brown bready sort of thing right across the middle of the palate. As I said, the brown bread in this one comes across as sort of quite grainy in a sense. It is almost like the bread crusty note, so the bread crust gives you that wee bit of a slightly more dry character. But middle third of your palate, back third of your palate, as I say, big brown bready, bread crusty note there. On top of that though, on top of the bread, the more kind of dry bread crusty layer, we could talk about in Scandinavia knäckebröd, the sort of crackery bread kind of thing. You certainly get more of a kind of thicker, you get a little bit more of a kind of thicker brown bready layer in this one. So yeah, I do like how that goes together for sure. But yeah, it does, as I say, this beer really is a more bready, grainy leaning Vienna lager. So potentially the most bready, grainy leaning one that we've had in this little mini series that we've been doing so far. But yeah, that is the backbone of this beer in the middle third and the back third of your palate. So if you go to the middle third of your palate, you can feel there's a little bit of a thicker bready note either end of that. You can feel the sort of bread crusty note kind of builds up, so it's almost like you've got a kind of, how do you say, like almost like a little valley in the middle of your tongue. But yeah, I think that really works in this one. But on top of that kind of nice brown bready layer, you can feel there's some brown sugary elements to this one for sure. I think we'll go to those in a minute. Underneath the kind of front half of that middle third of your tongue, you can feel there is a little bit of a woody. There's a bit of a woody element to this one. So yeah, underneath the front half of that middle third of your tongue, underneath the front half of that middle third of your tongue, there's a nice sort of woody element to the beer, and then there's a good little bit of a kind of nutty element there too. But the nuttiness, I would say, does take more of a back seat. It's just a very slight nuttiness, but yeah, quite a little bit of woody character for me coming out of this one, particularly the further you go into the aftertaste. But yeah, big brown bready notes sitting on top of that. But in the middle of your palate on this one, if we talk about that middle third of your palate, you can feel a nice kind of big circle there. And that's where you've got the brown sugary elements coming out of this one. And it's almost like the brown sugars are kind of mixed in with the bread, because it's quite a kind of thick, bready sort of brown sugary note that you get out of this beer. So yeah, you can certainly feel that in this one. But yeah, a nice kind of big bready brown sugary note in there. The brown sugars, incidentally, they do come across as being, if you go to the dead centre of your palate, you do get a wee bit of that more kind of treacly, you get a wee touch of that kind of treacly molasses like brown sugar in there, but that's very, very minimal, I would hesitate to say, and it's not even that dark, if that makes sense. It just comes across as really thick and syrupy. But as you move further out from that, you get a wee bit more, you can feel the sort of brown sugars, just kind of mixed in with all of that, and you can feel that you get a bit more of a toasty brown sugary element as you move out towards the kind of edges of that middle third of your palate in this one. But I think it's fair to say that the middle third of your palate, a wee bit of woodiness in there, a nice kind of brown bready bread crust in there, thicker kind of, thicker brown bready sort of thing to this one, as we say. And then the brown sugars in this for me are quite interesting. These are quite unique compared to the other ones. So wee bit of treacly, highly caramelised brown sugar, a little bit sweeter as you move further out, then a little bit more toasty beyond that. So yeah, I like how this beer goes about its business from that perspective. So yeah, the malty middle of the beer in this one is quite interesting. But let's focus on the back third of your palate. So border region between middle third and back third of your palate, again you get a wee bit more of a bready build-up, a little bit of a slightly stronger bread crusty note there, but the base of the back third of your palate is the same, quite a bit of a stronger bread crusty note. The intensity of those kind of grainy elements gets a bit stronger the further back that you go. On top of that you can feel a slightly thicker, I would say, brown bready layer, and then on top of that you can feel the more airy yeasty elements out of this one. So the back, you know, it's a slightly sweeter brown bread that you get on top from the kind of yeasty elements in the beer. But when you start at the back of the palate, with this one, you can feel the flavour is quite tall, but then as you move further forward with this beer, you can move further forward. With this one, you can feel that the sort of flavour just begins to condense down a little bit. Then as you hit that border region between middle third and back third of your palate, it condenses down quite a lot, and you can feel these flavours are quite sort of squashed together. But as I say, the middle third of your palate really gives you that bread crusty, almost floury bread, flour as in Flour kind of note. You do get a bit of that out of this beer for sure. But that is the yeasty and the malty side of the beer. Then let's focus on the hoppy part of it. So yeah, hoppy part of the beer then. For me, back corners of the palate in this one, you certainly get a good little bit of earthiness out of this beer. Yeah, the earthiness I think does linger there into the aftertaste as well. And I think that builds a good bridge between the sort of the more grainy aspects of the bread in this beer. But as you move further forward, it certainly gets a little bit herbal. It almost gives the impression of English hops slightly, this one, which is quite interesting. Or I've had similar flavours from more organic grains in beers actually, but as you move further forward, as I say, it's quite herbal. As you reach the front corners of the palate, you get a little bit more of a noble type floral character coming out of the beer. Then round the front curve of the tongue, it's certainly lighter and grassy, and there is a teeny little bit of zestiness to the grassiness there, but it's quite a sort of fresh, wet grassiness that you get off the beer. Other than that, I don't think there's too much to say about the green component of the hops in this one, so we can focus on the fruity part of the beer. So border region again between middle third and front third of your palate, again you get a bit of a bready build up in there, a slightly more intense bread crust, but the base of that front third of your palate is again that sort of slightly drier, bread crusty, floury brown bread sort of thing. So yeah, it's a wee bit dry underneath, but I think that suits it. On top of this though, you get that nice oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters roll their way out of the beer. And this is quite interesting too. So on the, as we say, on top, towards the back of that front third of your palate, you'll get the kind of slightly drier fruity elements. You get the sort of sultana, the dried white green grapey kind of elements to it. So yeah, a little bit of a kind of drier white green grapey element to it as well. There's maybe you know, I think other than that, what else could we say? I don't think there's too much. I think it is, yeah, sultanas on that back half of the front third of your palate, but as you move further forward into the front half of that front third of your tongue, as I say, you get a very light sort of figgy note to it. Then as you reach that, as you reach the kind of front edge of the palate with this one, you get a little bit more, you do get a wee bit more of a kind of peary ester there. I think in the middle of that front third of your palate, you're getting a more kind of oily peary note. Then there's a wee bit of a slightly more kind of red fruity character to it as you go further forward as well. You know, I think it's front half of that front third of your palate, it's all about a very light, juicy kind of figgy note in there. Then you've got the kind of sultanas, the kind of sultana notes on the back half of that front third of your tongue. Then there's more of a, there is a little bit more of a kind of peary ester there, but then yeah, front half is a little bit more kind of figgy, I would say. You get a little bit more red fruit off this one the further forward that you go, but it's certainly an interesting beer from the fruity side of things. That is a bit different compared to the other ones that we've had in this little Vienna lager series so far. But yeah, this certainly gives you all the types of flavours that you would expect for a Vienna lager, but definitely more bready and grainy, and then the sort of herbal, earthy sort of thing you get off of this one is a wee bit different as well. It reminds me of a few of the organic grain beers that I've had actually, but overall it's a really nice one, this. And as I say, the whole point of this series is to get more familiar with the Vienna lager as a style. So yeah, 100 Blumen have done a very, very solid one here, and I like it. So yeah, interesting. It's interesting. I do wonder how much of the kind of breadiness that you get out of this beer comes from the yeast actually. Maybe they've got their own house yeast and that's what makes it a little bit different. But yeah, I think we can round off the tasting there and just look at the mouthfeel quickly then. So mouthfeel wise, you know, this beer is interesting because it does have it has the sort of cleanliness you'd expect of a lager, and I mean the Austrian beers I think do feel very clean. You know, mountainous country, you're going to have good quality water there, so it does have that kind of typical cleanliness to it. But you know, underneath it's got a little bit of that kind of raw, grainy, bready sort of thing we've spoken about quite a lot in this beer. So overall, I would say this beer, it kind of comes in towards the top end of light-bodied, bottom end of mid-bodied. The carbonation in this one is quite it's quite nice. It's got quite a bit of crispness to it, this beer actually, which I can certainly appreciate. I'm drinking this one very close to its ending date, of course. So it says I'm drinking this beer for you on the 8th of August 2021, and it actually says it goes out of date on the 12th of August. So maybe that's the reason why the carbonation becomes a little bit more crisp, because it does have a bit of bottle fermentation going on. So bear that in mind. Maybe when it's a wee bit fresher, the carbonation would come out a little bit differently. But yeah, it does have a nice little bit of crispness to it, a nice crisp cleanliness, which you do want from a lager. Of course, these beers are supposed to be drinkable, so it gives you that nice kind of crisp cleanliness. But I think overall it's fair to describe this one as being at the top end of light-bodied, bottom end of mid-bodied. I think that works for it. So malty-wise, as we say, there's quite a bit of bready graininess to this one, potentially from the malt itself and from the yeast. I think it's probably a combination of the two, some sort of house yeast. There's a wee bit of sweetness to it, but the brown sugars I would say are a little bit more kind of toasty in a sense, and a bit kind of thicker almost. Hoppy side of the beer, it's difficult to pick up what the IBU count of this one is, because there's quite a bit of graininess, as I say, and that almost gives you the impression of, you know, being slightly bitter. So there's a wee bit of that with this too. But yeah, the malty side, bit of sweetness, bit of graininess underneath. I'd say maybe about 20-25 IBUs in this beer, which is quite standard. Then you've got a little bit of a kind of dried, fruity character as well. But overall, I think it's a really interesting beer, this one, and quite different from the other Vienna lagers that we've had so far. Quite a bit of dried fruity character, dried fig, you know, dried kind of a little bit of an oily pear, and then a sort of dried, as we say, dry, you know, a bit of a figgy note, and some of these kind of sultana type qualities. So yeah, this I think is potentially one of the more quirky Vienna lagers that we've had in this series so far, and I like this. I've spent a bit more time talking about this one, of course, but I always get excited with reviews like this. But yeah, I think we can leave it at that for this one. This one is the Wiener Lager, 5.2% ABV from Blumen Brauerei in the Askersdorf district in Vienna. Really enjoyed this one. So I hope that you guys have enjoyed my take on it as well. Let's leave it there. Once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comments section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Blumen Brauerei, and do let me know some other Austrian beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review as well, and I'll talk to Hans about those. But thank you again for watching. Check out my social media. Check out Blumen Brauerei social media. This one is the Vienna Lager, 5.2% ABV. I'll see you guys soon in the next review. Check out this beer. Certainly a more bready and grainy take on the Vienna Lager in my experience.